I think an agency is a really good vehicle to learn how to start a business, create a business by mimicking other businesses. In the info world, to profit $100,000 a month, you're still a baby. I know so many guys that just get program after program after program after program. And they go through the entire program and they don't do anything to act on stuff.
I don't get paid on output, it's paid on outcome.
You can make a business that does well over $1 million a year by just getting really good at one platform. Saturation is a really good thing when you're starting a business because it shows that there's proof of concept and that the model is working.
Before we start this podcast, I have one little favor to ask you. Can you please hit the subscribe button down below so we can help more people every single week? Thank you. All right, bro, man, I'm super excited for this. I really appreciate you taking time for this. There's multiple different areas I want to get into. But the reason why I'm really fascinated by you is because you're like a fucking hidden ninja, man. You're like the operator behind everything, but you've done so much different stuff. So it's going to be very valuable for people. But from your knowledge, from what you've been exposed to, what do you think is the best business to start in 2024?
Wow. Right out of the gate with a pretty open question. I'm going to make it my goal today this is early my time, by the way. I know, what time is it for you? Because I know we're across the world from you.
Exact same time, 12 hours ahead. So 8:45 p.m.
Got it. So this is earlier than I ever take meetings because my brain is still kind of kicking on. So this is normally when I'm, meditating or praying or reading the Bible. So this is my goal for this early interview will be to not say because my brain is still turning on. I think if you're new to business, I really do still think online service-based agencies are probably the best beginner business model, right? So I think it's a ladder. I don't think that most people should aspire to make an agency that they can sell or that makes, hundreds of thousands a month in profit. I think an agency is a really good vehicle to learn how to start a business, create a business by mimicking other businesses. It's a very proven model. It's an ROI offer if you do it right instead of a convenience offer. There's a lot of benefits to agencies when you start out, but they are just vehicles, in my opinion. I was actually thinking, because I'm going to speak at a few agency events soon, I was thinking about what I would want to speak about. And I think one of the topics of conversation that no one goes over is just economics of an agency. You don't really see agencies ever start to profit more than 60 to 80 is like the average high profit agency. Maybe 100 to 150 is like top 1%, top 0.1% of agencies. And then of course you have your Eddie Maloofs and such with bad marketing that are your anomalies, right? But the reason I'm saying that is I think it's a great model to start. And if you look at the economics of it, I think a lot of the profit should be reinvested into learning. And then after that, you start to get into your more lucrative businesses like info products. Info product, I think, is the next logical path. Maybe, you can look at the info product operators, growth consultants, et cetera, that are starting to learn, which are agencies for info, which is essentially just outsourced C-suite, which is what I do for companies. And then after that, I think the one thing that people jump to too fast is SaaS. People see the exits for software and they're like, oh my God, I want to get into that. I want a $50 million exit. But the failure rate for SaaS is so high because SaaS is one of the most complicated vehicles you can get into in business. And so I think realistically, the chain for me would be agency or online service-based agency, specifically ROI offer probably on B2B, and then some kind of info product, whether that's B2B, BizOp, et cetera, depending on what you're good at. And then somewhere down the line, maybe portfolio company, SaaS, brick and mortar, et cetera.
Man, that's super fucking interesting. So I went straight into the deep end, right? I was in the tech startup VC, grungy, like backstabbing neighborhood, like from my early 20s. Now, I wasn't a founder, but I was like, employee 3, employee 4 of these companies. And then I joined like, Series C, Series D, big companies. So I see just how dirty software is, like as in how complex it is. And when I hear like 21-year-olds being like, oh, like I just built like this 16 SaaS and you could do it too. It's just funny because like, it's
like the no code SaaS stuff that's going around right now.
Yeah, you only scratch the surface, right? And like, there's nothing wrong with no code, right? You could build, so, they're describing now at the moment, I heard Shamat talk about how, people are building their own Slack on no code now, and they're saving thousands of dollars a month on Slack in enterprises because they're rebuilding it. But it's like, it's just nuanced, right? And it's like, I feel like that software level is almost like elite level entrepreneurship to really crack it. I've had a few mates that have raised 20, 30 million and drove the business to zero because it was just that hard. They just ran out of money, just ran that hard. Now,
it's scary raising money, bro. I'm new on Twitter now. I'm sorry, X. Do people call it Twitter or X?
I call it Twitter. I'm the same as you. I'm so not in that group.
Yeah, I'm brand new to it. I'm talking like 100 something followers, like brand new to it. And I'm right now, I'm in a phase where I'm kind of I follow like 10 people on it, and I'm just reading kind of how they tweet to just learn how how that social platform functions. And there's a guy that I used to work with. His name is Caleb Maddox, good buddy of mine. And Caleb tweeted something the other day, because he's in the AI software space right now. I don't know what that hybrid would be called, but it would essentially retweet on funding. And I don't understand why people brag about funding. I don't know about you, but in the software space, they brag about how much money they raise and how much money it's just, to me, it's like, look at how much risk I'm compiling, and how, and a lot of the time they do what you said and drive to zero. And so I think, anyway, software to me there's a reason I haven't started a software company yet. It's probably been on my map for, I'd say, 2-ish years now. And I still don't think I'm a mature enough entrepreneur to make at least the odds of success higher, so that I feel like taking the gamble on it. It's never going to be 100%, but I still feel like it's not high enough for me to spin the wheel or to take the hit on it.
And you'd need to be self-funded. That's the difference, right? Because like I was in the VC space, just aware of it. And I was in that industry when the money was flowing. And I was seeing the founder parties, man. They were raising capital. They were going on trips with the money. I saw all this shit. And it was just, I always just had raised an eyebrow. And I was like, something is wrong here. Anyway, something's wrong. And then if you flip it, right, in a recession, service businesses like our business works really effectively, because we are the outsourced partners to enterprises. They're like, fuck hiring people, fuck paying your medical care, fuck caring about your feelings. We'll just give it to an outsourced partner, and then we'll take care of the rest, right? But you made a very good point. Well, you made an interesting point about the cap limit. And I hear this a lot, right? About, agencies get to a certain point and it's more difficult to scale and so on and so forth. Why do you think that is? Because like we're at that stage. We're definitely at that stage now, whereby we're doing like 70, 80,000 revenue, like 50, 60,000 in profit. I don't feel that, but is that something that kind of like happens naturally from there? And I'm quite interested in that space.
Yeah. Your margins are still so high that you're not there yet, right? If you're doing 60K on 70K or around, you could probably spend more money to make more money. But think of it, it's just the vehicle. So let's use the word vehicle for the analogy, right? At the end of the day, a Honda Civic can only go so fast. And so if you put a Corvette engine into it and mod it and put, nitro or whatever, you can make it go faster, but the amount of money you'll spend to make that go 1, 2, 5, 10 miles per hour faster versus its top speed out of the gate from factory, it's not worth the squeeze, right? And so I think, let's say you're going to spend 30 grand on a Honda Civic to make it go from whatever the top speed is, let's say 150 to 160. You're getting 10 miles per hour faster versus, I need to probably talk in kilometers per hour for you guys, but let's say 10 miles per hour faster for 30 grand versus you could probably just put that 30 grand toward an old Corvette that out of the gate does 180 miles per hour. And so it's the same thing with vehicles, right? So for time and energy spent, you can always make your business grow a little bit more, but it comes down to leverage on time and money. And so there's a point when the friction, think about the laws of thermodynamics, not to sound like I'm getting all guru-y here, but when something starts to become high friction, you have to push it way more to move it. And so it's the same thing with an agency. At that friction point, it becomes worth it just to start playing a different game with a different vehicle that's meant to go faster. That is more complicated to start. And so the barrier of entry to have a good info product business is slightly higher than the barrier of entry to start an agency, right? And so realistically, when it comes, I wouldn't even necessarily say that's the truth. I would just say that info product businesses have a much higher friction point. And so one of my favorite things to look at now that I've had a really good bird's eye view on is we work with the agencies and we work with info products. And if I talk to an agency that's profiting $100,000 a month, which is far and few between, let's even just say 100K in revenue every month. Those guys are so full of themselves versus info products that are doing 150 grand in profit or 200 grand in profit. The difference in character between those two entrepreneurs is so much, because on the agency side, to do 100 grand or close to in profit or rev, whatever you guys want to talk about, that's top 1%. But in the info world, to profit 100,000 a month, you're still a baby. there are still guys out there that are way, 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 way larger than you, right? And so that just shows on its own the difference in vehicle and the difference in terms of numbers that people look at.
If you think about it, it's kind of like, to give an analogy, it's like playing football in your local league and being the best in your local town versus going to the Champions League final, right?
Yeah, I would just argue the only thing about that analogy is it's still a different sport, right? So it's like playing football in your local league to then going to play cricket in a Champions League or such.
That's interesting, because at the same time, there is agencies that have kind of broken through, but it's a good place for people to start, or even that agency model or the client-based model. Because that's kind of how I describe it. We're not really an agency; it's more like a client-based relationship. I'm going to get into that at some point, how that kind of functions. But should that discourage people from making their first million as a result? Because that could cash flow really positively, and then you could basically not have to go again, right? If you got to that point and continuously run it up.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound like a Debbie Downer on agencies. I said it to start. Agencies are probably the best business model to start as a beginner, right? I think that it's a really good goal. I mean, think of how spoiled we are talking about this, saying that the cap is 60 to 80, not the cap, the friction point is 60 to 80K on average in profit every single month. And so what we're saying essentially is, yeah, it's sad that you can only really on average profit 800 grand a year from an agency. That's bonkers money for 99.9% of the world, 99.999% of the world, right? And so I think it's by no means something to shy away from it. I think that agencies are the best beginner online business model to start, hands down. I think that there's a few reasons as to why. Number one, we talked about raising capital. You don't have to raise capital to start an agency. It's, as long as you can really pay for GHL essentially at this point, and you don't even have to, but as long as you can put together $100, $200 a month for software fees. I was watching something from Hormozy the other day, and I talk about this all the time. I don't like quoting other entrepreneurs in this space because I feel like when you quote people, you're putting them on a pedestal, and I don't think that Hormozy is pedestal level yet. I think he's on his way, but for the most part, that's why I like to quote Steve Jobs, Elon Musk, etc. Guys who have really crushed it. But Hormozy did have a really good point about every business starting in debt. I like how he worded this, so I'm just going to kind of paraphrase it. But everyone thinks that debt is financial, but you have learning debt, right? You have I call it learning tax, but you have all these debts of things that you don't know or finances. And so at the end of the day, when you start a business, you have, call it knowledge debt. You just don't know anything about what you're doing. You don't know how to, you don't know how to hire team members, you don't know anything from scratch. You don't know how to run ads. You don't know how to get clients. You don't know how to sell. You don't know how to, even get sales calls. You don't know how to hire people. You don't know how to keep people. You don't know how to pay people. You don't know how to do any of that. So that's all called debt, knowledge debt. Realistically, to start out with knowledge debt and then call it financial debt, because most other business models, you need to either, raise for developers, right? Or you need to, if you're starting a brick and mortar, you need to put in some kind of cash for your storefront or your gym or whatever be it. There's so many types of debt that you can start with, that the amount of debt that you minimize to the least amount of debt that you can start with, meaning just knowledge debt, is a really, really good starting point. And then the cool thing from there is there are so many agencies that are successful being hitting that friction point, that you have a lot of good material to copy from, if you will. And so you can just essentially say, I see this agency in this niche. I'm just going to do the same thing and learn from it, right? Which is, I know a lot of people don't talk about the fact that, how do I word this? It's not a common thing to talk about the fact that copying people is the best way to start, but that 100% is the best way to start. If you see someone doing 80K a month in profit, just copy as much of that as you can, and even if you only get 10% of it right, you're still going to get, that's still 100K a year in profit that you're copying, right? And so you are mitigating your knowledge debt, if you will, and making money in the process. And then I think realistically, the thing that I was thinking about in the car this morning is everyone says reinvest into your education, reinvest, like learn. It's often said by info product owners. But I think the part of that needs to be said is budget learning into your profits. Because what I see a lot of agencies do is, let's say they profit 20K a month. They often are spending 14K, 15K on education, right? And I think there is a certain amount of line that you should look into. So if I was looking at an agency that's profiting, that's doing, let's say, like you said, 70K a month in revenue, I'd say probably don't need a closer at that point. It's too small. Maybe have a setter, depending on what your setter OTEs are based on where you are in the world and where your setter is. Maybe budget anywhere from 5 to 7% for a setter, maybe a little bit of a flat fee. Probably have a CSM or two. You can keep your hard costs pretty much under 12 grand a month at 70,000, right? And so if you're doing that correctly, then you have 60K, and then I'd say budget 20%, 25% toward learning. And so on 60K profit, then you're looking at, my numbers are a little foggy here. I just went from 80K or 70 to 60, but say 60K profit, budget 20%, which is $12,000 a month toward education. And I think if you look at it that way, then you're going to force yourself at higher numbers to keep learning, because the other paradox that people get into is they learn a lot when they are starting, and they almost get into debt, if you will, starting, because they're in payment plans, all this stuff that they have to pay back. And I remember when I was making $50,000 a month with my agency, not having almost any cash in the account because I was way overspending on education. Or I think realistically, I probably could have taken a little slower. And then now I don't invest in anything, which is, I'm guilty. I should be investing in education still. I still haven't learned nearly, probably 0.1% of what I can learn. I think it gets a little different when you get to a higher level. But the reason I'm saying that, I think, is to go back to all of it. I think agencies are great models to start. And I think if you look at the fact that there's no better way to learn in the business world, in my opinion, than agencies. That's why it's all a learning game.
Man, I fucking love your mindset towards this. There's so much aspects of here, even how you've invested in your learning, how it's contributed towards how you think and how you learn, how you perceive like agencies and business and logic around that way. Now, you made a very good point about how you don't invest now at this point. If I can make a guess, is it because you want to be selective with what you let in from an information perspective? Because you've absorbed so much, so you're picking and choosing and cherry picking? You're
flattering me too much. It's laziness, to be honest. It's I'm dumbing it down a little bit. It's a couple things. Number one, I think you go through phases of life where you're learning and phases of life where you're doing, right? So like I don't mean to sound like Ty Lopez or stuff. Like I have books here. Like I'm constantly like trying to.
We talked about that, man,
take knowledge
before.
Yeah. On the first. So for those that don't know, we talked for, I think, probably 45 minutes before on another call when we were starting to talk about the fact that we wanted that podcast just to get to know each other. And you're an avid reader too, right? And so I think I try to consume knowledge at least that way. But when it comes to dedicated, there's two sides to it. Number one, I'm in a phase right now of just doing. I know a lot, and I just have to kind of put feet to the ground and actually do, right? But number two is, anytime I've invested in education, it's because there's a skill set that I need that I don't have that is keeping me from getting to where I want to go, right? And so just a normal gap for a sale. Meaning, let's say realistically, on any of the businesses I'm starting, I needed to learn how to raise money, right? Which I never want to do. But let's say that I needed to. That's a skill I don't know. And so I would 100% go and look for the best raising or capital raising rate funding program that you could find. And then I would invest into it, right? I just don't have anything right now that I think is a skill set that I am weak in, that I need to get better at the current moment. The other side to it too is, a lot, the guys that I would learn from at this point, I don't think it's info products or such. It's more so like, pay $100,000 for a one-on-one every month kind of thing for a few months, or kind of like Hormozi talks about, start investing into different nonprofits and such to get around different circles. Now I look at, this sounds so like Luke Belmari, which I'm not throwing shade by any means. I just don't like talking about this stuff because it sounds douchey, but I'm looking at what golf clubs do I join so I can get around higher level people and such. And, yeah, I think the education at a higher level is, how you get it is different. But right now it's just reading. I'm just being lazy with it, if anything.
For sure, man. I think what's an interesting observation there, though, is if you go back to the guru space, and I just spoke to someone recently about this, how a lot of guys, they start out with the student mentality, and this is how you're going to make your first 10K, your first 20K, your first 30K. And then they swap to the guru status. They declare that they know everything. And then they denounce the student aspect. That's when the ego comes in. And then that's when I would say people would stop investing in themselves, because they're at the point where like, oh, I know how to do everything. I know how to send emails. I know how to send outreach. But to your point, we do have a setter. And the reason why we have a setter is because I needed someone to step things up. Now, I had two things I could do. I could pay with my time or pay with my wallet. And what I did was I paid my wallet. I messaged my mate, Tim Stoddard, and he said, speak to the guys at Automated Revenue. I gave the guy, Dylan, a message. 20 minutes later, we were in the program. 3 days later, I'd finished a course. 7 days later, I had a setter. And that saved me 6 months. Do you want to launch a podcast for your business, but you don't know where to start? Remove the stress, pressure, and all the overwhelm that comes with it by working with Podcast University. If you're an ambitious individual who wants to build your influence online, grow your own podcast, and also stand out from the crowd, Podcast University is for you. We help you with the strategy, equipment, the content, your guests, everything you need to create a top-tier podcast. If you want to learn more, check out Podcast University and start your podcast journey today.
That's another thing we could even get into another thing. Whereas, a lot of people, the dangerous thing about education that no one talks about is it's like a drug. And so the biggest, I think, hot take. I think one of the biggest things, especially in the entrepreneurial space, that's just a money trap is the self-improvement space, right? So if you go to any bookstore, the amount of self-improvement books, if you go to, if you go on YouTube as an entrepreneur, everything's biohacking or the best desk setup and like all this different optimization stuff, right? And so, Hormozi is really, I'm talking about Hormozi a lot today, but Hormozi is really commonly known for, he's commonly known for the line, just do the work. And I think just to give context to a lot of stuff that's really commonly understood in the space, the reason that's such an important line is because I know so many guys, for example, bringing this back to education, that just get program after program after program after program. And they go through the entire program and they don't do anything to act on stuff for 6 months, a year, 2 years, et cetera, right? They're self-help junkies. It feels, I call it the YouTube effect. There's such a high release of, if you will, of feeling like you're growing when you're watching a YouTube video that tells you about, people would rather spend 2 hours watching YouTube and feeling like they're growing than actually spending 2 hours prospecting or doing anything that actually grows the business, right? It feels more productive. Feels like you're learning. And so it's almost like the equivalence to an online junkie, if you will. And so I think that there's a lot that you have to be careful with, if you will. But what you said is the exact opposite, which is more like me. You got into something. You said you went through the program in 3 days. I'm guessing you probably didn't even go through a fraction of it. You probably just watched what you needed to watch.
I actually watched all of it. Can I tell you a funny point? Sorry, I don't mean to. This is a funny. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I got to the very last video. And I swear to God this happened. And on Sunday morning, I looked at the last video and then no one had watched the last video. Because you can tell if someone watched the Loom video. I was the only person that watched the last video. And my girlfriend came in and she was like, I'm done. And she was like, you started that 2 days ago. She's like, was that worth the money? And I was like, absolutely. I just burned through it. I learned what I got all the frameworks, tools, and templates. And then they gave us help giving the setter and stuff. And I was like, I didn't pay for the duration of time. And this is a big caveat too, right?
It's a huge misconception or reality distortion. You didn't pay for time you learned. You paid for the time you saved from learning or the nuggets of information you got.
Exactly right. Like a consultation for $1,000 or $2,000, right? It's like what I can get in that time. I don't get paid on output. It's paid on outcome, basically.
Yes. Which is based on the leverage that you have to be able to put it. You have a business that you can apply that information to with enough leverage to actually make it worth, right? So I talk about this. A lot of people ask me for one-on-ones and I tell them it's just straight up not worth your time yet because the amount of stuff that you can actually action from what we would talk about, you don't have the leverage in your business yet to apply. But I'm the exact opposite of you. I'll get into a program, spend 20 grand, 30 grand on it, et cetera, and watch 0.1%, 1% of it. But the 1% that I watch is the one thing that I needed or the two things I needed. And then I can act on that. And I don't really care about the rest of it. Right. And so I think I'm either an info product's worst nightmare or best client in that I never complain. I rarely show up to the coaching calls unless I have a specific question. I'm there when I need it. This is back in the day. I haven't gone through a program, like I said, in a while, but I either have a question or I'm not there kind of thing. I'm there to gain one little tidbit of knowledge that I can put leverage onto or not in the slightest. And so, anyway, yeah, I'm saying like 1,000 times, but education's huge. I think the best way to fund that education is through an agency. I think agencies are the best business models to start. I think that there's so much proven concept and proven companies to model after that, it's the easiest time ever to start a business,
Tell me, what's your thoughts on community pages? So everyone under the sun is telling you to build a community page and build something in the back end. Do you think it's a viable...
You're saying a community page, but you mean school,
yeah, community. Like I call it, I call it the glorified group chat. But as a front end business with a back end coaching offer, like, do you think that's your way to like make millions?
So I'll tell you what I'm doing. after I tell you my thoughts on this, right? And it almost sounds like I'm being hypocritical. But I'll bleed this better. Money does not like what the masses do. There's two kind of phrases that I think about with money. Number one is money does not like masses. And then number two is everyone's heard of the phrase, a jack of all trades what is it? I'm sorry. A jack of all trades is still better than a master of one or something. What? Something like that. Long story short, everyone says you should be a jack of all trades, not just a master of one. And I agree with that in personal life. I think in personal life, you're way better off being someone who can work on a house, learn martial arts, handle a gun, cook, play some kind of music, et cetera. I think being a jack of all trades, not a master at, master fire, I was going to say fireman, sharpshooter, versus like just being a master electrician, et cetera. That's a little bit of a trade. But my point is, you want to be able to do a lot of things in your personal life and be well-rounded. But money specifically likes the master of one. Money likes the top 0.1% copywriter, the top 0.1% salesperson, the top 0.1% content creator, editor, et cetera. And so money does not like the masses and money likes the masters. Those are two things that I think about. So when I think about these communities popping up, and I love Sam. I had a really good lunch with Sam. Sam's a smart guy. And so I'm not trying to dog school in the slightest or impede that. But when everyone's going to do one thing like start a school community, to me, my alarm goes off of like, that's where 99% of people are going. So I have to do something very different, right? It's the same thing. I know it's ironic that I talk about this as I do a podcast with you and kind of start doing some content, but everyone right now is trying to be the next Iman Gadhzi, the next Luke Belmar, the next Ramosi. Everyone's starting their content runs. And so that means realistically that if everyone's going to content, there's probably something else to do, or at least do content in a different way than everyone else is doing, right? And so because of that, I'll talk about the specific community stuff and how I think about the monetization stuff for that in a second. But I have a Slack group that instead of free, it's $1 a day. I'm not trying to shout this out right now. I'm just trying to show my thought on how to create something different. So I realized that the concept of having a lead pool is a necessary part of business. Before I was school, you saw Facebook groups. Facebook groups were like the largest way to nurture a community or a group or such. Now it's school. I wanted something different. So I thought to myself, where do the people that I want to sell to essentially have what's in their tech stack? And 99% of the time it's Slack. I'm sure you talk to your team in Slack, right? And so, yeah. And so then I thought about the fact that Slack is paid. It's like $8 or $10 per user or something like that. I'm not going to lose money by, the thousands to have a community. And so I was thinking at first, okay, I'll just have people, pay for their costs. But then I thought realistically, at $1 a day, if I can just give someone $1 a day of value, and I think I way over exceed that expectation, then I can have a group that creates cash to an extent. I think it probably makes a couple of $1,000 a month that I nurture to, I sell to. But the whole thing is, it's not a community, it's my journal, right? And so this is the other side about community. I think community kind of goes alongside that like self-help junkie stuff where you see there's only three people in a community. Number one is the person who runs it, right? The moderators, the admins, et cetera. Number two are people that join the community to try to sell to that group of people. And so in every single school community, in every Facebook group, et cetera, you have other info products, other coaches, other et cetera, going in there kind of like wolves in a sheep den, dressed as sheep. And then they're just prospecting out to your people. If you don't realize that's happening, then you probably have a bad group. But those are your first two. The third kind of person is your average member. And realistically, what I've learned is that members are, you have two types of members. If you want to break that down even further, you have the members that are non-existent, and then you have the members that are just spending way too much time in the group and not getting anything done. And so I think that the fallacy of a community is that, realistically, all you see is people who are not doing the work hanging out in the community, or people that are doing the work not hanging out in the community. And so this community starts, it's very hard to have an active, highly engaged, highly effective community, right? And that's because, think about people like you and I. We're not going to be spending all day in school or looking at a school group and asking questions to people that we would consider not as progressed in businesses ourselves. And so, I think realistically, do something different if you want to monetize. My way of doing that right now is $1 per day Slack group. That could be there's 1,000 ways you could do it. It could be a WhatsApp group realistically where it's invite only. It could be as long as you have something to nurture a group of people through valuable content, valuable posts, et cetera. That's all that matters. And I think realistically, just having, even if it was a free community, just not on school. Sorry, I don't know if you heard that sneeze. Even if it was a free community, just not on school, where it was on, now Facebook or Circle or whatever, just as long as it's not where the masses are. Because right now, no matter how good your free community is, if it's hosted on school where 99% of communities are hosted on, it's just another voice shouting in a crowd, you know?
You're never going to become like a category of one from that perspective, because you're just going to end up following basically everyone else into the same kind of hole. Now, it could work and like everything works, but it's all about execution over the longer time. And it's all about brand too, right? And like, not to derail this, but one thing that I kind of admire about you is how you hold yourself, how you present yourself, how you even talk, how you even dress, right? And that kind of like brand is important. And that's how you're going to be able to get good leads and bring them into your Slack group. It's how you hold yourself up with that argument. So it's just interesting, right? Because it was like TikTok. You know, when TikTok ran up, we have a bunch of clients that say to us like, oh, should they move on to TikTok? Should they bring their podcast to TikTok? And I'm like, no, like that's like where the 16-year-old like kid is basically. Whereas we use LinkedIn. Like I've been deep down LinkedIn for many different years. Like 90% of my business has come from LinkedIn. I've thought it was since 2019, I just knew it was like on the rise. I can tell you why that was, but I
would love it. I hate LinkedIn. It's the bane of my existence.
Really? Let me give you a walkthrough, just the reason why. So 100% agree that like it's virtue signaling, like there's a bunch of other weird shit. There's lots of like virtue signaling bullshit that's on it. However, 1% of the platform create content, 99% of content consume content. The average salary is around 85K, 75 to 85K. And people there are generally there to like engage and to do like quote unquote business, whether that's read your prospecting emails, read your content. And then people like Justin Welsh, who I know quite well, when he came over to LinkedIn, he built like LinkedIn Business, which is like online entrepreneurs, solopreneurs, agents, not even agency owners, mainly just like info product guys to share insights, share actionable information. And that really built that community. So the online business community blew the fuck up. And then the last cherry on top is a lot of the Twitter guys came across with better quality writing, more actionable stuff, better copywriting. So it made this very powerful platform. So if you're someone like, let's say me, for instance, who puts out like a lot of content, I'll probably do 7 to 9 posts a week. So every day. Then when I prospect and I reach out to someone like you, right? And we have a podcast business. If I was to reach out to you, you would click on my profile, you would see a bunch of social proof, which is like, 900 posts over the past 3 years. You would also see a bunch of high value people engaging with it that you may know, and vice versa. And lastly, then you could get a good feel of like who I actually am, because my kind of ripe against Twitter is the fact that like everyone is a Fight Club fucking headshot, right?
Yeah.
Do you get me?
What I think is so cool about this, can I interrupt? Is that okay? So 2 things strike my brain. Number 1 is that the space is so big that I've been in the space for well over 5 years at this point, right? Which I know doesn't sound like a long time, but in the online business world, over 5 years is a pretty decent, like every month feels like a year, right? Especially when you start to work with some of these bigger companies. When you're working with companies that are doing, multi-millions a month, and I've worked with a few companies like that, every week feels like a month kind of thing. And so I know it sounds like over 5 years isn't a long time, but to me that is. And the space is so big still that there are communities like that and social platforms that I've written off that are apparently still huge. The second thing I think is my entrepreneurial brain looks at that and shiny object syndrome goes off right away. I'm like, oh my God, LinkedIn, I didn't realize it had that much potential. I got to get on LinkedIn, et cetera. But there are people that could say the exact same thing about what you're saying for LinkedIn on Twitter. There are people that could say the same thing about Facebook. There are people that could say the same thing about, school and Instagram and YouTube, blah, blah, blah. And probably more that I don't even know about. So I think the whole game is you can make a business that does well over $1 million a year by just getting really good at one platform. I think that's the thing that most people will try to spread themselves too thin and focus 10% of their time on this, and this. I think the guys that make a lot of money, they're just very good at saying, this is my golden goose. I'm just going to feed this one. And once I get that to a certain level, call it few $100,000 a month or so, then I'll start to learn the LinkedIn thing. And so, for example, it's taken me a little bit of discipline right now to not text my assistant and be like, let's get on LinkedIn and focus on this stuff. It's more so like, I have a plan. I need to play out the next few months on Instagram and maybe some YouTube stuff. I'm actually going to do the opposite of what you just said. I think TikTok has an amazing algorithm for getting in front of other entrepreneurs. And so I think TikTok will help build an Instagram account kind of thing. I don't look at TikTok to get business. I look at it to essentially build the Instagram following. I think there's a couple cool paths there. And my whole thing is just going to be Instagram over the next year or two.
And that's why I love it, right? Because there's 1,000 ways to get rich, only a handful of ways to go broke, right? And I spoke with...
I love that saying. I haven't heard that before.
I spoke with Iman Al-Abdullah. He was the CEO of AppSumo. You probably know AppSumo from the agency space. He's a great guy, and he breaks it down that you can get to... He said you can get to like 10 million a year with persona, who you sell to, product, and promotion. And for promotion, he always vents like that. You don't need multiple different platforms like ads and this and this. You just need one vehicle that you can scale. So if you have something that's working for you, which for us, it's cold outreach on LinkedIn and content on LinkedIn. So you just do more of it, because like it doesn't like business doesn't care like about like what happens. It's just like whatever's working, just fucking do it. Whereas my friend like Jack Hopkins, who I was speaking to recently, he kills on Instagram stories. Not Instagram stories. Man, I wouldn't be able to articulate my thoughts on Instagram stories in contrast. So it just...
That's what I do. Instagram stories have been my...
It's been Iman stuff as well, right? And like there's an art and a science and a craft to it, and storytelling and persuasion and everything. So it's just interesting, right? It's an interesting way to view it.
Yeah. What's funny is, like I said, everyone will hear this and be like, I got to get on LinkedIn. I didn't realize there was so much. And people will hear the Daily Bread, I call it the Daily Bread, the Slack group thing. And they'll be like, I need to create a Slack group and such. And so I think a lot of, if you looked at the path of an average entrepreneur sub like $1 million a month, it's just like, I need to do this and then this and then this and this. And the more they listen to, the more they have all these different ideas as to things they could do, and the less focused they are on any of them. And I think sometimes it's the Achilles heel. So long story short, for you, LinkedIn sound like that's awesome. I don't think you'll ever see me on LinkedIn. It's just not something that approaches me, at least right now, in what I think could be the main leverage mover for me. So
for sure, man. That's an interesting observation, right? Is like the different maturity you have as an entrepreneur. How have you seen yourself kind of level up in that way and change character basically as you've like evolved?
Yeah, exactly. I don't have anything more to say on it. I think I just think it's really cool to me, almost enlightening for me to realize like, oh, cool. I apparently have the discipline to hear something like that and not think I have to do it, which, talk to me 3 years ago, I probably would have been on this call on the side, making a LinkedIn page and stuff like that and typing my first piece of content out. That's how my brain used to work.
Tell me about what you think won't make you a lot of money this year. Like what businesses are there that are kind of like, oversaturated or whatever. And what comes to mind for me is like, like a short form agency. Like I get messages every single day about like short form. And not to say it doesn't work, it's not going to work. I'm just saying that there's a lot of people that want to get into the space. Like what springs to mind for you that needs a recession, that needs a correction in the market?
The first thing I'll say is just saturation, I think, is a way too played out word. And so you just used it, and I'll give you I would love to hear your input on this after I share this thought. But I think that saturation is a really good thing when you're starting a business, because it shows that there's proof of concept and that the model is working. And so if I was trying to start a business, I think a great business to start right now would be short form, because if it's really common, that means that there's a huge demand for it. And if there's a huge demand, that means it's probably going to be easy to get to a couple $1,000s a month, $8,000, $10,000, $15,000 a month. Saturation only really plays in at scale, right? And so when you're trying to go from, call it 10,000 to 100,000, still really saturation doesn't even play in at 100 grand. But when you start to try to go for $200,000, $300,000, $400,000 a month, that's when you start to get into kind of market share and dominance and such. And saturation at that point does impede that. That's when you kind of feel the trend of the market. But I actually like my favorite agency to start, or to tell beginners to start, is a real estate marketing agency. Real estate is one of the most saturated industries you can get into. I just think it's way easier to find people who are succeeding, way easier to find people who are, running different offers that are working. It's just so, the more saturated it is, the more you can copy, the more you can look at people as idols, not idols, but at least, again, the more people you can copy, I think is the easiest way to say it, the more demand there is. I like saturation for starters. I don't think that there is a model right now that I look at that I think is a loser of a model, if you will, or just something that's going to make you less money. If you're starting, if let's say you got to like 20, 30K, now you're looking for a different model. There are different things that I would look at to make more leverage. Example given, I think an AI agency right now is probably a very good short-term play to make a lot of cash. I don't think AI agencies are going to be a long-term play by any means. I think AI is this is a hot take, but I think AI is probably more of a trend right now. I think it'll constantly be in society for the rest of our lives, but I think that it won't be nearly as trendy as it is now for a long time. I'm sorry, I don't think it'll stay trendy for too long as it is now. So I think an AI agency is a great play for now. I think that, the no code stuff is slowly dying off. You saw no code SaaS blow up and such. And so a lot of it kind of depends on what you want to do. If you want to make a business that's going to last 2, 3, 4, 5 years, then I would say start looking at an agency that's a very fundamental, just online service based, boring agency, right? If you want to create something that is going to skyrocket, then learn how to play those like market bubbles. It would have been AI it went from like short form to AI. Those were like the two things that, would have been amazing agencies to look at. I don't think, unless you're trying to sabotage yourself, I don't think there are really business models that I would look at right now that would be losers. You could start a business probably in print media and still make $10,000 a month, because there's still like that. There's still people that would want to do it, and so I don't know. I can't think of a single thing that I would say out of if I was starting. I'm going back to if I was starting, because I assume that's probably a lot of the people that were listening to this. Again, if you have leverage, then it's completely different.
Of course. I have an interesting take on this too. I think that if something is saturated, or if it's perceived saturated, I think saturated is the wrong word for it, right? But what I would view that is that a lot of people suck, right? So if you imagine a bell curve, you have people like that are at the bottom, right? That like they have no idea what they're doing. People just in the middle, and then you'll have a few people that are killers. So it's usually like proof of like concept as a result, right? And in the middle, a lot of guys like can't deliver. They can't sell. People in the door can't market, can't showcase them, and can't deliver. And that's just the unfortunate truth, right? Is the fact that that's why most people don't push on, is because they're in that no man's land and they never really actually kind of figure that out. And that's the unfortunate truth, right? Because even looking at info products, so this is quite interesting. I actually started with courses originally because I was working in tech. That's how I kind of started my kind of entrepreneurial journey. And then from there, I was like, I needed more time. So info product was a good idea to like scale something that didn't involve my time. However, how do you think about building an info product, specifically courses, like from zero upwards? Because sometimes, the idea is that if it's lower ticket, it's hard to scale, right? And you need constant buyers coming in. Like, how do you think about that for kind of early entrepreneurs? Is that quite difficult?
So I said to start that I think the barrier of entry is a little higher on coaching and consulting offers or info product offers than it is for agency. And this is partially why. With agency, the easiest way to start is outbound messaging, right? You said you got an SDR and they started playing with it. But for coaching, it's a lot harder to get outbound nailed in, because the thing about coaching is that you have to have an authority frame. And if you like, an authority wouldn't be doing outbound, right? You would never see Elon Musk messaging people like, "Hey, do you want me to teach you?" kind of thing. And so
you want to do short form,
right? Yeah, and so it's hard to create that authority with outbound when you're coaching, and so there is a little bit of trickiness. So a lot of the time you have to, you see those guys grow from. You can get outbound to work. I'm not saying you can't. I've done it, but most of the time when you see successful coaching offers, it's coming in from inbound, meaning a lot of time organic, Instagram stories, YouTube, etc., or paid ads. All of which are skills that tend to take a little more time to learn, or at least have some kind of authority or leverage to create. So if you're a brand new person to the space, unless you really, like, when I say brand new person, I'm talking to 99% of people that start a coaching company that have no experience doing what they're doing, kind of thing, right? But like, if I started, example given, an info product, and this is on my horizon, if I started an info product on how to grow info products, almost like this, you see Luke Alexander doing the IPO stuff and the growth consultant stuff, Nick Hosman did, et cetera. I think I'd be a very good person to teach that at mass scale. And so I feel like I could start something and probably have it go out pretty well. And I would know what I'm talking about, so I could make organic content on it. But a lot of the time when you see people starting coaching offers, they don't know what they're talking about. And so they don't know that organic content doesn't hit. If you watch, think about 99% of the short form stuff you see right now, even the long form stuff, it's a lot of people saying nothing with a lot of words, right? And I think realistically, that's just because they don't understand what they're talking about. Einstein said a really cool line that I think is like recently been forgotten about with people talking about short form, but that you only really understand something if you can explain it in one to two sentences. And so I think that I can take a lot of complex things. I think Hormozi and Tai Lopez are probably two of the best in the world at this right now, but taking complex things and simplifying them into 1 or 2 sentences. I think that's a skill set that I have as well. And I think that just comes from understanding, which is why when I make content, I think it'll work. Most people, which is how I would, essentially fund the coaching business through organic leads. If you don't have that, then you have to get really good at either paid ads or you have to get really good at outbound. And then when it comes to price point, to go back to your question about low ticket and high ticket, I think the only time that a low ticket offer makes sense, and for the sake of us understanding, what do you define low ticket as?
Oh, I would say anything that really doesn't involve like setters or like any sort of intermediary step. So anything below like 1,000.
What about like price point?
Yeah, as in below $1,000. For me, I would perceive it as like less than 2K, but generally for most people below $1,000.
Let's use what you're saying. Below 2K is fine, right? Anything below 2K. Let's say below $1,000, because a lot of people would go like 300, 500, 900, etc. Right? Everything is always a prime number. Have you ever realized that? 3, 5, 7, 9. Those are like the price points you always see. But anyway, so realistically, below $1,000, I think that you can make a business that does 10 or 20 grand a month off a low ticket product. And the reason people do the low ticket stuff is because they see other low ticket products, but the only reason to have low ticket products are for one of 2 reasons. Number one is a lead magnet to a much higher ticket product. And so you'll see companies have a $300 product, but they have $50,000 things on the back end. That actually is, where they make the primary amount of money. And the $300 thing is almost like an ad liquidator. That's number one. Number two is if you have a large audience. This tends to be a lot of the guys that I work with. And so, my current consulting company, I think the aggregated amount of subscribers and followers between my clients are probably like well over 10 million at this point, right? And so they have audiences, meaning if you have an audience, the game now becomes finding the sweet spot, if you will. I'm sure there's like a scientific term for it, but the sweet spot between price point and liquidation of audience, meaning how much of your audience can actually afford to buy and then do buy, versus when you start to go, if you're too expensive, then you're pricing people out. If you're too cheap, then you're leaving money on the table. So where's that sweet spot? A lot of the time with audiences, that's why you see people draw out, $9.95, $4.95, $14.95, et cetera. That's the reason behind that price point. Otherwise, if you're trying to make a business that's doing $50, $100, $200,000 a month, you don't have an audience, you really are going to tend to see, that's why, 10 grand is such a common price point. The economics of higher ticket stuff work better, because at a business without organic audience, what you're going to see really is that you have to have a setter and a closer for the most part. You have to have someone finding deals, triaging, setting, et cetera. And then you have to have usually a team of people closing it. So factor in 15 to 20% in commissions just out of your top line, right? If you do that on a $1,500 offer, a $1,000 offer, a $500 offer, the economics don't make sense. Your team's not going to make enough money to live. So you can't find talented people. And then so, you either don't ever hire them in the first place, you don't keep them, et cetera. The economics are terrible on low ticket stuff. And so you have to start to go higher ticket. If you're just starting, you're probably not going to do 50K stuff. And so if I was just starting a coaching business and I wanted to make money off it, I'd probably do a $5,000 to $10,000 ticket. If I wasn't who I was with leverage and some kind of following, I'd probably start a 5 to 10K ticket, have a setter at 5%, probably do the closing myself to save the 10% right now, which does kind of hurt with the authority frame. If you were a coach who was, in the B2B space is what I think of. In the biz or in the B2C space, if you're a coach for like personal training and stuff, that's different. But maybe a closer at 10%. And then realistically, I'd probably start to get really good at running ads and then some outbound stuff. That's the process of which I would run and the price points. Does that answer the question, or am I kind of going off left field?
It does, man. And the economics of it is really interesting, because you made a very good point about like the authority frame and maintaining influence and authority. Massive words that I talk about in my writing and my content. And it's interesting to observe the fact that like if you get the unit economics wrong, you fuck yourself, because you have to get on these sales calls and actually diminish your authority even further. And then you made a good point about like the ninja shit with the economics of how you profile your audience. So we do like, high ticket B2B stuff, but my podcast is completely separate. Now, at the same time, I don't sell into my audience, which is actually kind of why I've built an audience really well and engaged, because people know that I'm not getting anything from anyone, and people know that I'm not presenting anything to anyone, because if they want to work with the company, they can work with the company and go that way, right? But I think it's an interesting observation, right? Now, how do you think about that? Because you work with some very, very big guys, right? How do you like work with their audience size and then profile some products and even split test some products, like what's the mechanics is going on there. Are you an entrepreneur who wants to build your influence and authority online? You may have tried some of the hacks and tricks, but none of it has worked. And it makes sense. 90% of podcasts don't make it to episode 3. Of the 10% that are left, 90% of them don't make it to episode 20. That's where Voix comes in. Voix creates, manages, and grows your podcast for you on your behalf. If you've not been getting leads, not been growing consistently, you haven't found your tribe, and you don't know what to do, Voix is the answer. Don't just take our word for it. In the past couple of years, we've managed over 35 podcasts. We've also been able to generate over 55 million views with 500 episodes produced. And not only that, generating over $1 million for our clients in products, services, and sponsorships. So if you want to learn more about how you can build a great podcast and have it fully managed for you, schedule a call with me at Voix, and we will help you achieve your podcast goals.
Number one, just on the getting on sales calls frame. This also depends on vehicle. So if you have an agency, because we talked about agencies, you can hop on a sales call as an owner, and you should, until you're doing $100,000, $200,000 a month. I think one of the things that you see agencies do too often is delegate sales calls. There's one regret I had with my agency that I had a few years ago. Is that I got off sales calls when I was doing like around 50, 60K a month. And I think that was way too soon. If I did it all over again, I'd stay on sales calls until I was doing $150,000 a month. Coaching is different just because the authority of coaching is a whole different type of frame, right? And so it depends on vehicle as to when you take different kind of strategic moves like that. When it comes to the, number one, what you said on the podcast stuff. And so I'm sure if you don't know, if you're listening to this, I used to be on the C-suite and help run a team with a guy named Iman, brilliant mind, good friend, really smart dude. And he said a line when someone was talking about his audience. And he essentially said, the reason that this guy doesn't have that type of audience is because he does what he does. He sells to his audience. And Iman he cares about his audience so much, right? And that's one of the reasons that he's been able to grow it. Because just like you, he doesn't try to make a practice of selling every single time he talks to his audience, right? And anyway, so bringing that back, Iman, of course, is not a client of what I do. He's just a guy I got to learn from and work with. But the guys that I do work with now, the way that we get into split testing is depending on price point. So realistically, let's say, for example, given that you wanted to sell, let's actually just play this out into like almost a mini coaching thing between you and I, right? Let's say you wanted to start your podcast. Wanted to start selling to your podcast. And you were thinking about, the latter. The first thing I would say is like, you have a following. So you probably need to come up with something very low ticket. I'm not talking $300-$500. I'm talking like $7, $20, $30 or something. I'd say let's come up with something very low ticket. And so it could be tell me about your podcast, your audience, your listeners. Who are they? What do they do?
So young guys, 25 to 30, first-time business owners, first-time entrepreneurs, mainly male, 95%, UK, Ireland, and America.
I know a lot of Ireland is like one of the sweet spots for entrepreneurialism.
Really?
There's so many, or at least
I would say the opposite. I would say the opposite, man.
I guess I'm in a bubble, right? But I've found a lot of good, talented guys in Ireland, and the first thing they tend to do is want to move out of Ireland because probably of what you're saying, Ireland is not something that grows entrepreneurial spirit. But the guys that have that character inside of them, you can find a lot of good talent in Ireland. But so let's say realistically, if they're new business owners, you're like, okay, let's make some kind of low ticket thing that it appeases or at least approaches one problem that they might be dealing with. So new guys, maybe they want to start a podcast because they know that starting a podcast will allow them to talk to higher level people, and they can either try to sign clients out of that or use that as lead flow, or they can use that as coaching, free coaching. A lot of people start a podcast because you can just have conversations with higher level guys and essentially just ask what questions you have for your business on the podcast, right? So whatever it is, you can make a program that is how to use a podcast to make to add $5,000 a month to your business or something like that, whatever it is. And it could be a very small basic program, like a course for $7, $20 something, whatever be it. The purpose of having something low ticket is that when you have something that is ultra low ticket, I'm really talking less than like $60, $70. No one thinks you're using that as a liquidation mechanic. And so if you CTA, example given, on your podcast or on your story, that something for $3,000, $1,500, $5,000, $10,000. If you CTA that, I call that squeezing your audience. And your audience feels the pressure of being sold to. And just like you said, the reason you can grow is because you're not putting that pressure on them, right? But if you look at guys who are massive in the info space, what they do is they squeeze their audience with things that don't feel like you're being like, it's almost like boiling a frog, or what is it, frogs that can boil and without feeling it, right? And so realistically, it's like boiling a frog without realizing it's being boiled. And so you can squeeze on a $7 or $17 offer, and people don't even recognize that they're being sold to. Because the psychology, if I had to take a guess, I've never read a study on this, but I'm guessing the psychology is that the price point is so low that they don't think you're making money off it. They think you're almost doing them an act of favor of putting something that's attainable for such low cost. So that when you see Grant Cardone, Tony Robbins, Dave Ramsey, Dan Martell, I'm putting Dan Martell in that group of people. I don't know if one side note, I was on a podcast the other day. My brain works this way, but I was on a podcast the other day and I said that I put Dan Martell in that group of people and said he's probably making a couple $1 million a month, a few $1 million a month. And I'm not sure if he is or not. I'm guessing at the amount of short form I see that he's probably doing at least 2 million a month, but I probably floated his numbers a little bit. I said that, and I don't like saying something. I don't know why I said it. I spoke out of my ass on one thing, and it's all that I've been thinking about for the last 7 days is the fact that I said this one thing and I'm not sure, and it's driving me insane, but I'm going to put him in this group of people. If you see all those big guys, what they do really well, almost every single one of them, is they have a ton of low ticket stuff, most commonly a book. Dan Martell has a book, Buying Back Your Time. Grant Cardone with all the different books he has, the 10X Rule, the Closure Survival Guide, et cetera, right? Dave Ramsey has 15 books or something at this point. Tony Robbins has a F ton of books. All those books, if you're on this podcast and then you say, we're talking about something, or let's say since I'm a guest, I'm on this podcast, we're talking about something, and I say, oh yeah, bro, if you want to learn more about what I just talked about, I actually wrote a book on it. No one thinks that I'm trying to make money off that. They're just like, oh, sweet. That's, it's value in a book, and they don't feel like they're being sold to. But then I get your info and I get your email. I get your, if I'm doing it right, I can get your Instagram handle. I get all this information to where, I don't really give a shit about the $7 or $10 or $17 or whatever. I care about the fact that now you're in my ecosystem. And once you're in my ecosystem, that's where the magic starts to happen. So what we would play with is what's a low ticket thing that your audience would like. And then we would probably find a way to CTA it to get an email list, and say, we would kind of ramp up the fact that you're about to do this, spend a month kind of promoting the fact that you're going to drop this thing. If you're interested, put your email, down below, blah, 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 whatever be it. And then we would do a split test on your email. There are only two really effective ways to split test low ticket stuff. Number one is ads, right? So ads to different funnels. Number two is email. So let's say you could rack up 10,000 emails. We would probably take 2 groups of 2,500 and run 2 different price points. Whichever price point wins there, then we would test that against another price point. I'd test it 3. And so we would test, let's say we would test 17 and 37 or 17 and 27 or whatever. And whatever one there, then we'd probably play with another 10 denominator. So let's say 27 won, then we would test the second group of 2,500 versus 2,500, 27 and 37 and see which one wins there. And we would essentially use that split test, understand where your audience has the highest. The word I want to use is coefficient, coefficient of drag is what you would use in aeronautics, right? And so what level of drag gets you the most performance for the least amount of negative? And so what level of price point, I'm not a scientist, so I'm probably not explaining coefficient of drag the best, but essentially what level of price point liquidates the most without your audience feeling like they're being squeezed. And so from that, essentially start to build out that. And then the cool thing is, this is, again, the psychology of just how humans buy and sell. When you get their email and phone number and such, if your team is emailing, so if let's say, you started email marketing, which 99% of businesses don't do. For some reason, we don't email our leads. But let's say you started doing daily emails, and then you built out an SDR team or an MDR team that started actually calling the leads that bought the book and just saying hey, I'm calling from Paul's team. Saw that you bought X, wanted to make sure that it got your way. What do you think? Quick question, just because we're thinking about writing another. What's your favorite chapter? Awesome. Why is that your favorite chapter? Is that something you're looking at doing in your business? Blah, blah, blah. And then before you know it, you're getting a set call, right? And so all of that stuff, people don't ever feel like they're actually being sold to behind the scenes. And so it's cool. You can't CTA a $10,000 program, but you can sell a $10,000 program via email, via phone, et cetera, on the back end from that $7, lead magnet. And they don't feel like they don't attach that pressure to your brand on social. So you don't lose engagement, which is what most people have happen, right? You start to CTA all this stuff. You start to go from, 50% engagement to 30% to 10%. A lot of that has to do with short form. People do short form wrong too. But you lose engagement, and then you lose audience, and before you know it, your brand is dead. But if you look at the guys that grow really big, they have great engagement, they have a lot of brand power, and it's because they CTA small stuff that doesn't feel like they're liquidating, and then they do all the selling on the back scene. So that's what I work with the clients I work with on. The cool thing about that is it's also a lot harder to copy. So we talked about when you're starting, you want to have a lot, everything you want to copy as much as you can. When you're scaling at mass scale, the whole game become as least replicable as possible, or at least make it harder for people to copy you. And so the cool thing about back end selling is it's a lot harder for people to copy that process.
I love that, man. And my mind is firing even thinking that, because I'm seeing the different guys in the space do that really effectively and in a very nonchalant way, because it's often helping you. And this is where it's interesting, right? As like, I have nothing wrong with selling. If anything, I would say my best skill is sales. I would say just naturally, I got my partner to fall in love with me. I got my clients to sign with me. I would say arguably is my best skill is being able to communicate. Now, having said that, I would say that like a lot of times is, as you pointed out, you said this, was that, hey, I have the $7 offer. It's of service for you. I would be a disservice of me to not give it to you or show it to you, because you're actually helping them in that process. So I'll give you another example. If you're writing a book on how to scale companies, I know that's how you work with. If you wrote a book on that, and if I spoke to you and said, hey, like the book was awesome, it would be a disservice to me if you didn't say that you had a coaching offer. Like I'd actually want to know that. And I want to find out more about that. I'd want a few things. I want the book. I'd want the $1 Slack fucking group chat. And then when I have the capacity, I'd want someone to come in on a fractional COO basis, scale the shit out of it, and walk out the door afterwards. And that's ideally what I want, right? In that kind of evolution stack. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being able to understand like what it is you're selling versus growing an audience the wrong way, fucking up your engagement, and then kind of selling your soul, right? And I know like,
exactly.
There's a difference between entrepreneurs,
which is what 99% of people do, by the way.
Exactly.
And it's because it's a lot easier to do that. All the other stuff we're talking about, writing the books, there's a reason ghostwriting is a company. Writing a book is treacherous. And then creating all these low ticket things, if you created a $7 podcast tool, right? It's probably going to be something you could technically sell for thousands of dollars, but you're essentially doing all this work and putting all this time in for something that you're not going to liquidate from very, quickly. And so it's all these barriers of entry are why, number one, why they work, but number two, why no one does it, right? Which I argue is why they work, because no one does it. So sorry to interrupt.
No, you're right. I have a newsletter going out tomorrow. It's like 52 weeks of writing my newsletter, and it's been like one of the highest ROI activities ever. Man, my email list is tiny. And the reason why is because like I'm just distilling my thoughts, I'm sharing insights, I'm sharing frameworks and tools, and people look and they're like, oh, this guy's like, he's semi not stupid, so we might work with him. But it's funny because it's not about the depth, it's just about the next stage in the funnel or next stage in the process, whatever way you want to describe it, right? But you made a great point. People don't like the boring, right? And this is why I think I resonate so much with you, because you work on back end operations, right? The boring stuff, the non-Lambo stuff, which I resonate much more at sitting down at 9 o'clock on a Friday night talking about some back end operations versus like rented Lambo. Do you get me? It's just in my brain. I don't know why.
I get it. I'm the same way. To quote him for like the third or fourth time, Hormozi had a core value. I don't know if it's still a core value, but do the boring work kind of thing. And I think it's because in this industry, that's what does well. There's a proverb that I'm going through right now with my Bible reading. For those that don't know, I'm a Christian. It's kind of like the guiding light to how I act as an entrepreneur, but also just, and more so a human. But I make sure I go through Proverbs every single day. And then I also do a different book at the same time, right? And so a proverb I read recently essentially is just that all work is profitable, right? And so even when you put in time to something that doesn't feel like it's making you money, it will somehow in some way that you probably don't understand. And I think what most people do is they put in work and then expect, not most people, the way that most people think is I put in work, I get $1 out kind of thing. And if they don't see that $1 out right away, then they don't do it. Think about the fact that, if to quote Hormozi for the fifth time, wow, maybe I am putting him on that pedestal and I unconsciously don't know it. But, $100 million offer is probably one of the best books on offers ever written. Talks about the fact that, he talks about Viagra, for example, given, and how if you have ED, you can meditate to fix that. which takes years and such, or blah, blah, blah. Or you can just take a pill that fixes it in a few seconds. The whole thing that makes an offer work is the time horizon as to when you see return. It's the same thing as to how people look at work. They put in work, they want immediate return. The faster the return, the more likely they are to put in the work, right? And even entrepreneurs that are super disciplined entrepreneurs that, make money, they aren't good at understanding I put in X amount of work and I'll get X return in 6 months from now or a year from now.
That's a fucking good point. It's the best point you made, man.
Yeah. And so I think one of the things, and this goes back to like one more root thing, which is you can't do that if you're starting a business. It's impossible almost to do this because you're almost always operating from a place of starvation, meaning I have to find a way to pay rent, I have to find a way to put clothes on, feed my family, blah blah blah. You can't think about 6 months down the road, a year down the road, 2 years down the road when you're in a spot where you're just thinking about finances. But when you get to a point, and so I don't blame anyone for ever operating out of starvation and thinking short form, but the things that grow you as an entrepreneur, like what gets you to 100K isn't what gets you to 1 million, isn't what gets you to 10 million. It's always different. Almost always, it's actually the exact opposite of what got you to the previous layer is what gets you to the next layer. And so operating out of starvation is almost always what gets people to $100,000 a month, right? But then to get it to $1 million a month, you kind of have to flip and mirror what you did before, mirror being the opposite of what you did before. And so you have to start to think, okay, I really don't need to get to $1 million this month. I want to build things that get me to $1 million a month consistently a year from now. And so I'm going to do all this work that doesn't show at all for a year, right? And so example given, I've probably written 600 pages of sales letters this is for my company, not for clients, 600 pages of sales letters and free assets and such that I haven't even sent out. I haven't run any kind of ads to it. I haven't done anything yet. I'm building and rewriting and editing and building and rewriting and editing. And my goal is to have a library of such powerful free stuff that, or maybe low ticket, depending on what hits well, that realistically creates it's the weapon, if you will, that my sales team will use 6 months from now, 8 months from now, et cetera. And so it's stuff that I'm putting in 10-hour days, sometimes just writing, and I see nothing from it. And I won't see anything from it for a long time. And a lot of the stuff that I'm building outside of even all that stuff is just, things that won't make me money for a long, long time. But when they do make money, I think, it's almost like if you put in one minute of work, you'll get $1 out kind of in return. But if you put in 1 minute of work, waiting 10 months to get $1 out, you'll actually get like $50 out. It's almost like exponential, right? So I'm putting in hours, days and days, weeks of work, not expecting anything for a year. And I think realistically, that's why it's going to, I would say 2024 is going to be a good year for me. It's not going to be bad, but 2025, I think will be probably the best year of my life because 2024 essentially in my mind is a write-off, just building for 2025.
Man, you're planting the fucking seeds, man. So I first learned about this like aspect of time and like how billionaires think about time from Charlie Morgan, if you're familiar with Charlie. And I literally watched a video. I think I watched the video like 8 times. It was like an hour and 20 minutes and I wasn't like a fucking entrepreneur porn. I sat down, he broke down like the physics of it and about how when you read that book, like you're reading right now or reading even the Bible now, right? That most people will read it, think, oh, that was interesting. 100 million offer, that's interesting. And go on about their day and then blame Hormozy a month later when they don't close a client. But it's the book learning or the lessons that take an impact 6 months, 12 months, 18 months and have an asymmetrical return. So the whole point of your 20s or your 30s or your 40s is to find that one thing or the several things that bring you asymmetrical returns. Now that operates in a negative aspect too. You watch porn, you take drugs, you go drinking. It has a small impact before it has a huge impact. And I think the way he broke it down, which is excellent, was like everything has a cause and effect, but people don't understand the variable of time. So they think, oh, because I drank alcohol and I feel okay 2 days later, there's nothing wrong with it. But it's actually, if you drink alcohol every single week or month or whatever, that will have an impact in your 40s and 50s when you have liver cancer or liver failure or whatever the fuck it is. So, Amanda, I think that's just the difference between you, Iman, and all the other guys, right? Is like that decade-long thinking versus give me the Lambo now. Give me the cookie now. And what do you think about that, right? In terms of like people getting, I had a different opinion than Luke Alexander on this. I don't really have a strong opinion on this, but what I was kind of saying was I feel like that a lot of these guys, blow the cash and get themselves kind of back in a rut a small bit and get them back in that scarcity mindset because it did build that capital. They did have a lot of opportunity, but they almost, again, let ego run and then end up in a back position to some degree.
Can I run with this point for a second? Because this is probably the most powerful point I've personally make. So years ago, 5 years ago, I became what's known as a reborn Christian, right? So I grew up Catholic, and my mom took me to Sunday school, and I hated it. And what happened, I think most times when people have parents that kind of force them into like a relationship with church, they fall out, right? And so I then went the next probably 15 years of my life up until I was 20 something, thinking God is real. I don't really care though. I know there's a God, but just not worrying about it, not thinking about it. And then something happened in life where I just really, I don't know how to word it, but God just pulled me in, and I wanted to have a relationship with him. And as soon as I started to have a relationship with God, any Christian will tell you, as soon as you come back into God's life for the purpose of relationship with God, not church, but actual Christ, what happens is he starts to burn away any of the idols that you put above him, right? So anything that you treasure more than Jesus, he will chop you at the knees to take that away in the most loving way, right? It's almost like a dad who essentially just, if you have a drug addiction, will, beat the drug addiction out of you, kind of thing, right? I'm not saying you should, that probably is not the right choice of words, but my point is, in a very loving way, just it takes out. And my idol was money. So when I was young, I started out in the car dealership world, and this is before like online business stuff was a thing. And I was probably making $250,000 a year as a car salesperson, finance manager, and eventually running a couple of dealerships when I was like 20. That's a decent amount of money to be making when you're a 20-year-old, right? Especially when online business isn't really a thing that people know about yet. And so like all this bonkers money of young people making that was not really a common thing back then. So I felt like I was on top of the world. And because of that, I was the guy who got the nicest apartment in my city. I had, multiple cars, probably $200,000 worth of cars. I was the guy who bought everyone, dinner and drinks and everything when we went out. I had tons of I probably had like overhead of $8,000 a month or $7,000 a month or something stupid. And all of my pride and my being was found in essentially how much money I made. That's all I could essentially treasure about myself. Like I make a lot of money, and I valued money. So there was a stage where, long story short, I was going into the government, and 1 month of vacation turned into 14 months of being on what's called the bench and not making money. And this is exactly when I was becoming Christian. And so I also, when Donald Trump was in office and was draining the swamp, that's probably one of the reasons that I was on contract adjudication, blah, blah, blah. And so I went from having $80,000 in my bank account for savings to like negative $800 or something like that, right? And I remember just watching the overdraft charges come in. I actually think I got to a point where the overdraft charges weren't coming in anymore. I think they just like froze the account or such. I remember seeing just the red every time I opened up my Navy Fed account. And then I had one of those cars get repossessed. I remember constantly like coming back and just waiting for the day that car was just gone. I still remember looking out the window to see if the car was still in the parking spot, kind of thing, and then the one day where it wasn't, and I just knew right away, like okay, like it wasn't even disappointment. It was just like, okay, it finally happened. And I remember coming back home, and I was started dating who's my partner now. I remember we'd be getting off the elevator and coming to my place, and I would just be looking at the door to see a yellow notice that was essentially saying you have an eviction, like court date coming up, kind of thing. And I remember coming home to that like 3 or 4 times. Sorry about that. I don't know why that happens. And so I was going through this massive rut of finances, and I remember still, I haven't actually talked about this before. 2 things. Number one, this is the closest I've ever been to God in Christ. And so he essentially destroyed my idol, which was money, and essentially he created in me, or at least cultivated in me, that my being now is in my relationship with Christ and Jesus and God, not money. But number 2 is, and to really boil this point in about pride and not having pride in money, I still remember, dude, there were so many times where I had no idea how I was going to eat dinner that night. Like I had no money, right? And I was, at this point, I'm still in my apartment. I stayed in my apartment because at one point I remember my dad helped me out, which to ask money when you're a 20 or something year old kid and you move out and then you have to ask your dad to help you pay for something. That's like the most embarrassing thing. That's one thing. But before I did that, my entire apartment at this point, I had sold every piece of furniture, and all that there was in there, all that was existent now was a mattress that in the living room, right? I had some like plates and stuff, and then a mattress in the living room. No more bed frame, no more kitchen table, no more office. Like everything was gone except for a mattress. And sheets and such, of course. And so I remember through all this, number 1, being closer to God, but number 2 is God always provided. So I had a friend come to the door once and knock, and I hadn't talked to this guy for like 8 months. And he just said like, hey bro, I don't know why, but I felt you needed this. And he just gave me a couple $100. And I don't know if you've ever been in a place where like taking money from like you're not asking for money, but someone offers you money to actually take that money. You feel like you cannot have pride and take that money. I'll put it that way. You have to at that point understand like, you like talk about actual starvation mindset, but God provided. And I remember at one point I went, my friends we always had Wednesday night guys nights. And I remember at one point I told the guys like, guys, I can't come. Like, there's no way I can come out. I'll have a water or something. And they were like, no, we got you. And I remember my buddy, he's one of my best friends, probably one of the earliest mentors I've ever had in life. Really, really successful dude, very Christian dude. Was giving me a hug, and I could just feel his hand slipping something into my pocket when we were saying goodbye and giving me a hug. And he had slipped in like $400 or something like that for me to take care of me for the next however many weeks, kind of thing. And so God provided. The reason I'm saying this, it almost brings tears to my eyes. It's embarrassing to talk about, but it's because that embarrassment and that destruction of pride and ego and money idolization is what allowed me, in my opinion, to grow in a way where I didn't do what you talked about, which is making money and spending it, right? And so most guys, they make money and they never, two things. Not most guys. A lot of guys do what you said: make money, spend money, never get to that point where they can operate out of anything from starvation. Even though they make $100,000 a month, they spend $95,000 a month, $100,000, and they can't operate for a year not caring about cash because they have to, right? They've essentially built this hamster wheel that they have to fund. I never did that because God made sure that I didn't find my ego in cash. And so even though I have some nice watches and such, and I have a nice place and everything, I'm really, really careful about spending money, and I don't like spending money. It actually kind of sickens me every single time I spend money. The best money I spend is that I donate 10%, I tithe 10% of every dollar that my businesses make. Like gross top line, 10% goes to the church, and that's my favorite dollar that I can spend. Like I'm happy to do that. Every other dollar I spend feels like icky and wrong, right? And so I think the reason that you see everyone that has a come up story, like anyone doing top tier numbers almost always has had a rock bottom, right? So I just talked to that. What I just gave you was a glimpse of mine. I could go 10 times further into that. But Dan Martell has a rock bottom where he I think went to jail for drugs and such, right? Grant Cardone had a rock bottom. I'm sure Tony did. I haven't looked at his past. I'm sure Dave did. But all these big guys came from somewhere where they were struggling they came face to face essentially with their rock bottom. And what you learn is two things. Number one, at rock bottom, God takes care of you, right? There's a line in scripture that essentially says, look at the flowers and the birds. God takes care of them, and how much more important are you, kind of thing, right? And so he will take care of you at rock bottom in ways you never realize. And it makes you realize that rock bottom is something you can live through and weather. Most people equate rock bottom to death. I equate rock bottom to somewhere where I don't want to go back, but I just equate it to relationship with, this sounds bad after saying I don't want to go back, but I equate it to relationship with Christ. It was not by any means my in terms of like secular living, it's not my prideful time, but I just remember knowing that God took care of me, and I probably was more humble and meek then than I've ever been in my entire life. But because I went through that, I also look at cash as, any dollar I make is essentially stewarding God's money. Not to get super Christian on this, but I think God just now trusts me to steward his money, to take care of the people that work with me. I've become a better leader because of how I look at this. So I think I'm a better leader to the people that work with me. I think I'm more disciplined with the cash that he essentially sends my way, and how I approach that and growing the kingdom and how I spend it and the ecosystem. I think money is almost like an ecosystem. The ecosystem of money that flows around me is very giving rather than selfish. It's not like I care about buying Lamborghinis and such. I can probably buy any car I want, and I'm struggling to, my car is 7 years old right now. I'm struggling to get myself to buy another car, there's been a couple of guys, I almost always have guys coming to my office or like living with me and such. And I struggle to buy one, and they're here in my 7-year-old car, probably thinking like, why the fuck is Paul driving a 7-year-old Audi? Like, why doesn't he buy it? And they keep telling me to look at the Lambos or G-Wagons and stuff. And I'll probably just get like a Chevy Tahoe or something, just very, very simple, and probably keep that for another decade. But I think anyway, that's the root reason as to why I can build out for a year without having to worry about money. And it all comes back to the fact that I do everything I do through Christ because he he is me essentially at this point.
And that's such a fucking powerful story. Thank you for sharing that, because I know you hadn't done that previously. And what's most interesting is, again, it's the impact on you. The fact that you don't act out of scarcity anymore, because a lot of these guys, or a lot of people in general, not like guys in the online space, people kind of turn into an asshole, right? Have you noticed this? Like I put up a thread about it recently, being like, money is an amplifier. And if you have that air of like being an asshole, you become more of an asshole. So maybe you're better off without it. Maybe you're just better off with small farm, very simple, because it doesn't work well with your personality. But for you, like I can see that like you don't operate from a scarcity perspective, even if like things went south. You have that comfort and support, which is pretty unique, right? And I think that I would say, to your point with that material as well, is that you need to kind of go through it to experience it. And people have different varying levels of severity. Like I've had my experiences and my stories, which I do think about often. And it's a good, like, that's the baseline. Like we don't want to go back there. And man, you probably will notice, it's like the heaven and hell analogy. I could fuck this up now, but was it from like Cain and Abel when they were talking? That's like the reference, which is like, we don't want to go down here. This is the opportunity that we can have. And we don't want to basically imbalance it. But it's good to know where we could end up if things don't work out. I could have got that completely wrong.
You're not wrong. My favorite line on that is that where we are is either as close as we'll ever be to heaven or as close as we'll ever be to hell, right? And so I operate that. It's a different thing, if you will. I think that's C.S. Lewis, but it's a different thing I operate with. And so one of the other sides to this too is a line that's been sitting with me a lot. Are you a Christian? I know I'm talking about Christianity a lot. I don't know much about your faith.
I'm not really like actively Christian, so I'm from Ireland, which is like Catholic, and I grew up in like a Catholic household, and like
culture is Catholic, if you will.
Yeah, but it's
culture to be Catholic.
But again, back in fucking my day, when I was a kid, like young kid, is that the schools, like all the school systems are Catholic.
Yeah, that's how I was raised too, and it probably makes you stray away, which is what happened to me too. Because my mom's from Mexico, and in Mexico it's the same thing. Mexicans are Catholic by culture, right? And there's a line that's been sitting with me, going back to why people buy Lambos and all this different stuff. Because what's funny is you said, like, maybe you belong on a farm if money's not a good amplifier, blah, blah, blah. I want a farm like that. What I actually want now, I tell people the only things I care about money-wise at this point is I want to, where I live in Maryland, it's my home state. Nothing to me hits the same, but I want to have a large farm in the middle of nowhere on the water. It's all, with a lot of sunlight, right? That's all I care about. And to do it, it's going to be probably well over a $10 million home or something like that. And so that's really, if I'm working toward anything, it's seclusion so that I can spend more time with family and with God, and away from people. I think, do you know who Colin Castrina is? Side note. No, he's big in the podcast world, but one of the things that he came to my office once to get to know me, and he was like, bro, I think the most crazy thing that no one knows about you is just you're in blank town of Maryland. I'm in a very non-entrepreneurial, non-known town, and it's my favorite thing. I go to Scottsdale, Miami and stuff, and you see the entrepreneurs there and like the spirit, and I very specifically try to get out of it, if you will. But there's a line that's been sitting with me as to why people get Lambos and stuff. And that is that I think most people do it to be glorified. Most people are looking to get a Lambo so that, people see how much money they're doing, how much, they're making. The watch is nine times out of 10 are for this. And the line that's been sticking with me is why I expect to be glorified in a world that killed its Lord. So like Jesus Christ, in my opinion, this is how I operate. Jesus Christ came down to die for our sins. He was God and we killed him. And so if we can't glorify him, then who am I to even expect to be glorified? And so I know for a fact, if I get any kind of nice car or any nice watch or anything like that, it's not going to actually glorify me in the slightest. It's just going to, be something that I think of as making me look cool, and it's going to be out of pride. And so that's one of the, I don't know, something I'll find lines like that just sit with me for a bit. That's been the line that's been sitting with me.
It's always about who you're impressing, right? Like ideally you want to impress like your partner, maybe your future kids or whatever. Like that's who you're actually that's who you care about. You don't care about like randomers on the internet, basically, right? Before we finish up, my last question for you is, what do you want to be remembered for?
This is the easiest answer for me, to be a Christian one more time on this podcast, but I want to be remembered for someone who grows the kingdom of Christ through excellence in what they do in business. My mission statement as a human is to use business as a means to an end to grow the kingdom of God. And so I want to be remembered as someone who is respectable in business and good at his craft and knew what he was doing, but all of that through the image of God and through the creativity and wisdom of God. I don't think that I'm not doing the business stuff for the sake of doing the business stuff and making money. I'm doing it because I think that I can do it well. And I think doing it well will grow the kingdom. And so my dying goal is, I saw this once on a TikTok reel or something like that, or an Instagram reel. My dying goal is to one day die and have Satan's army essentially rejoice and be happy about the fact that I left the playing field of growing the kingdom of Christ. So that's my goal. And business to me is a means to an end to which to do that. I know we spent I'm sorry to talk about Christ as much as I have. And by the way, I know it's a hot take. To me, it's just so, I think it's funny, man. I'll talk about with coaching calls and podcasts and everything like that, prospecting and all these different systems. And I love that stuff. Don't get me wrong. But the thing that really makes me eager to do what I do, and to, the reason I want a platform, is because I love talking about God. I love talking about Jesus. And I think that anything I do to gain platform to do that is just a means to an end. What I'm realizing is, I say this humbly, but I think I'm smart enough to at least know kind of what I'm talking about in this space. And so people will listen to me. And then if I have ears, almost like a sales funnel, I'll talk about what you want to talk about, which is business stuff, not you specifically, but just humans and people in this space. I'll talk about the business stuff to open the ears. But then realistically, what I actually think matters is that we have a Lord and Savior that, people write off and no one talks about. And that's what I want to do. I want to be remembered one day for being a guy who uses business to grow the kingdom of God.
Yeah, man, 100% agree. Like, leave you on this note is that I often say, like, you focus on impact and everything else happens, right? If you're looking for money, you're looking for success, you're looking for status, that's just a byproduct of impact. Be first focused on the impact, and then everything else comes from there. Man, this was an insane podcast. I honestly want to say this is one of the best podcasts I've actually recorded. It's really, really insightful, man. I love how your brain works. It's very, caring, kind, giving me a lot of time. I know this wasn't easy as well to get it organized. I want to say a big thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man. This was a fun one to do. You're a great host.